Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson, and this week's episode consists of two discussions with Storyteller Vault creators. The first is Charles Siegel, who has written a lovely book on nodes and how to use them called Sources of Magick. The second is Secrets of the Masquerade on how to use the Major Arcana to make the rules of magic at your table dynamic. That publication you can find on the Storyteller's Vault under the name Secret of the Masquerade's Major Arcana Optional System. If either of them sounds interesting and you don't already have it, please click on the link in the show note and use our affiliate link, and that'll help us keep the show going. Speaking of keeping the show going, I'd also like to say thank you so much to the absolute explosion of support that Mage the Podcast has gotten in the last few months. Our executive producer roster has expanded, and normally I say this at the end of the show, and this time I wanted to say it up front. So special thanks to executive producers Brendan, Andrew, John Magnuson, Justin, Bill C., Anders, Michael Parker, Richard Bat Brewster, and the remarkably handsome Bryce Perry. If you'd like to support us and get a cool chat color in Discord and join our secret executive producer channel, go to magethepodcast.com and click on Become a Supporter of Mage the Podcast. Thanks. On with the show. Our first guest is Charles Siegel, a frequent guest on Mage the Podcast and a frequent contributor to the Storyteller Vault, probably best known for Enlightened Grimoire and Mystic Armory. This book is called Sources of Magick, and it outlines expanded ways to use nodes in Chronicles. It includes a mechanical breakdown of how it can be used, as well as paradigmatic examples of where nodes can come from. In addition to that, there are rules on what rotes are used to manipulate or instantiate nodes, as well as a bunch of possible nodes that you can introduce in your chronicle. In addition to that, there are expanded rules for rote creation, and I think some imaginative ways that nodes can function beyond just being a magical gas tank. Charles, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great. This is the second podcast I am recording today, and rather than making me feel like I am wasting my life by sitting behind a microphone, in the middle, I got to build something as part of the backstage crew of my opera company. So it was a day of
nice.
Yeah, it was record podcast, eat oatmeal, swing hammer, throw out shoulder a little bit so that you know you did something that day, record podcast. And I feel full of masculine energy, although that's probably just the oatmeal. I eat a lot of oatmeal. So what led you to write Sources of Magick?
I am regularly trying to bring new players in. And one of the questions I get a lot is, so what does a node look like? And how do you get the quintessence out of a node? Like, yeah, the rules say you roll meditation, whatever. But like, this is all very abstract. What does the character see? What do they feel? What are they doing?
Got it. This is a case where we have a mechanical view of the system, but we do not have a narrative view of the system. We don't know what the player sees. We don't know what the world looks like, and you're filling that in.
Yeah, it seemed like just a gap that was sitting there. There have been hints in the direction of it, and I tried to be consistent with the hints that had been given, but it was one of those things that always kind of seemed to be glossed over a little bit as one of the less interesting things to focus on. And I'm a big setting person, so magical locations, like all these sorts of things are important. Like anyone who has, seen some of say Burton's Batman movie knows that Gotham City is a character in that movie, and I feel like nodes should almost feel like characters in your game. They should be influencing things as much as an NPC would.
So the node should almost be a member of the cabal, as it were.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is a node mechanically? Like when we crack open the rules, what do we know about nodes roughly?
Gives you quintessence. That's actually the vast majority of what the background node is described as doing in every edition of the rules. There, like maybe sometimes it says gives you this much quintessence versus Mage 20, where it's the equivalent of this powerful of a werewolf cairn, which is not a really useful comparison for most Mage players. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit vaguer about how much quintessence or task you get from it, but generally it's each dot corresponds to a certain amount of quintessence or tasks that you get out of the node. It happens you get that much over the course of a week. And the reason that you want to node is it gets you quintessence. There's a few other things you can do with nodes. My favorite, most useful effect is that you can create a shallowing, which just lets you walk into the Umbra. But generally speaking, if someone's buying the node background, the point that they now have a refueling station.
Got it. And it's one of those things where it's a reliable source. So if I need to recharge a talisman or a device or fuel a horizon realm, this is something
feed a familiar.
Yeah, this is something I'm going to want to have in my setting. Now,
absolutely.
Does the game tell us cosmologically or paradigmatically what a node is?
Not so much. There are places where quintessence appears. It is hinted that they are more common in natural settings. I kind of reject that. I don't say specifically that is wrong, but depending on what view you take of why nodes exist at all in universe, you get very different answers to the question of where are most of the nodes. And frankly, if they're mostly in natural settings, then the technocracy wouldn't have very many, and that doesn't quite fit how Mage has been presented.
Yeah. In first edition, at least the first 3 convention books that we get all present alternative ways for the conventions to gather quintessence. We have the idea that the progenitors get it by literally bleeding off lifeblood from dying people. We get the idea that Iteration X harvests quintessence from absolute boredom. The Void Engineers can pull it from space rocks. Later we find out that the New World Order may literally have started cable news shows to harness quintessence from the outrage generated by people screaming at their televisions, which seems a bit more nephondic in my mind. But yeah, as those alternative quintessence gathering mechanisms were kind of downplayed towards nodes and tasks, it does raise the question of how does a predominantly urban-bound group get its juice? And your book steps in to try and answer these questions. So you posit 13 ways, and you put this book out into the world. You posit a bunch of paradigmatic examples of where nodes could come from. It's only $4.99. What is your favorite of the theories that you proffer?
So one thing that I'm a huge fan of in Mage that gets glossed over by a lot of people is resonance. To me, in some sense, resonance is the core of magic in Mage. So my favorite is the idea that a node is a place that has such strong resonance that if you know what you're doing, you can pull energy from that resonance.
So the idea is that we have resonance, which are the emotional or intellectual vibrations, the emotional or intellectual vibrations that active agents make out into the world and how the world responds to that, to take that into consideration. So you have an area that is so overwhelming of a particular feeling that coalesces into what can be a continuous source of quintessence. Can you think of a couple of examples of where that might make sense for a storyteller to use, like a resonance and a place where that may gather that a character could collect to power effects?
The most stereotypical possible node is something like a forest glen or a hidden lake that is just so peaceful and serene and untouched that quintessence just kind of bubbles up through it. And that very much meshes with the natural locations. It is the sort of place that you could also see other supernatural types like werewolves or changelings trying to set up shop. And everyone is supposedly everyone is interested in nodes, and everyone just calls nodes different things. So that was something I tried to keep in mind throughout the whole process. But a very different example could be, say, a carefully cultivated community center in downtown of any major city, where the camaraderie or compassion or whichever emotional resonance is strongest there has been, say, cultivated by mages or just by people for long enough that people care deeply about it, and the resonance grows, and now a mage could show up and actually get a power boost from being there.
And this kind of divides node theory, as it were, into 2 distinct schools. One is the idea that an area has a node that is aligned with a particular thing, and then mortals gather there and do something. The other is that mortals gather in some place, do something, and that affects the world such that a node springs up there. Like you have the ancient Greek idea of genius, or of a place, where Athens was presumed to have some sort of wellspring of great thought, and that's why so many ancient philosophers and thinkers and artists came out of the area, because the area had this natural, in the same way that an area may have useful rains for farming, or good soil, or pleasing winds, or a gentle temperature, or soft winters, an area could just disproportionately be likely to inspire you, and people would gather there. Where that theory that you present is more the opposite. A bunch of educators and researchers came together in an area. It became known for its hard work, for its discovery, for its continual generation of wonder, and a node opened up there because of that human activity.
So one thing that I personally tend to do is being very much a mage person, I build the world of darkness around humanity as the prime mover. So humanity being why there's a node makes sense from this point of view. On the other hand, another one of the paradigmatic explanations that fits more into the genius loci approach is, I imagine, would be very popular among particularly technocrats, but technomages in general, which is nodes are a natural resource. They're just in places, you can go to them and you can essentially mine quintessence in the same way that you would mine iron or uranium. In fact, a uranium mine is probably a node.
And this is one of those things where there is great advantage to realizing something is a more or less free natural resource before anyone else. Before we had internal combustion engines and such, the idea of an oil reserve of some sort beneath the ground was just this annoying thing that periodically made drinking water taste funny and shooed animals away from natural well springs. But once we figure out a way to use it, then it becomes this thing that we have a great demand for. And a node is the same way, that it kind of does have these byproducts to it where, yeah, sleepers may be affected to it, but we're the real ones that understand how to use this resource.
Yeah, as you described, an oil well is not of much use to a farmer. A uranium mine will kill you. It won't help you very much. But you get into the hands of the right people, and either of them can become one of the most valuable things on the face of the earth.
Yeah. And of the theories presented here, I think one of my favorites is the memories of the land. Because Charles and I agree on seemingly nothing in the mage setting except for that we need to get rid of the sphere of prime and just make that something that all mages can do. One of the theories postulated here is memories of the land. In my game, I like the idea that maybe 70% of reality is determined by mortal belief. 15% maybe is determined by great spirits and all the night folk and other beliefs. And then there's still this remainder of about 15% that is kind of just the way maybe reality started out. And the theory here is that it is memories of the land, that the land contributes itself to the consensus that before humanity, the earth determined what was and wasn't real and decided that humanity should exist and took on that burden, which I love as a theory. It's one of those things that I don't know of a lot of canon references to it, but it makes perfect sense. You could have a character that advocated for it. It fits very well with animism, Gaia theorists, and pantheists. And one of the things your book does that I like is it gives the theory and then at the end says, who are people who are likely to believe in this? And sometimes it's technomages, sometimes it's Nefandi, other times it's dream speakers, other times it's mystics who believe in the pure ones, shots fired. Are there any other theories that you think are particularly interesting that you think storytellers may want to consider, or especially if they're wondering if they should grab this book or not?
I'm a fan of all of them. One of the ones that to me is most interesting for spurring on plots, I titled The Gold Standard. It's mostly a syndicate theory, which is that nodes are basically just gold mines. We're not on the gold standard anymore. So if you have to sacrifice a node, what's the big deal? You should be using primal utility anyway, like an adult. I also tried to mention some of the consequences of some of these beliefs. Like, if you believe in this nodes are the gold standard, then you're not going to feel terribly bad if you just drain a node to deny it to your enemies. It's not really a big deal if you do that. Whereas, if you believe that the node is truly an important and sacred location, you might be willing to really disproportionately fight to hold on to or take it back.
Yeah, because at that point it is not just a node. It is a sacred place that may also provide quintessence, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah, and frankly, this is Mage. What's the point of a belief if it doesn't have consequences?
I like that. Now, the next section of the book is Resonance, Quintessence, and TAS. And you make an interesting statement in that in Mage so far, we have the idea of TAS that maybe has adjectives to it, like it could be dynamic or nostalgic or something. You walk through and posit that there could be nodes that form particular kinds of tasks aligned with the spheres. Where did that come from, and why do you think a storyteller might want to include that?
And it came from really this, honestly, a discussion with my wife where we started off discussing a node that was a nuclear reactor and came up with the idea that maybe the TAS is the radiation coming off of it. And so all the containment is partly there to hold on to the TAS and partly for protection from it. And then that seemed very forces aligned. And then I was thinking of other sorts of esoteric or non-material things that would be of value. And then the idea that a node might say, if you sleep near it, you have some weird sorts of dreams, and that was the TAS. You now have access to TAS in the form of that dream you had that night. I know from other discussions with you that you're a big fan of adding more weirdness to Mage.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you would appreciate that. It also lets mages get in on some of these abstract trades, like, well, I can give you this weird dream I had in exchange for this service, which also really makes spirit mages have a little bit more fun than just, oh, I'll give you a point of task for this.
And I like the idea that it forces a reason to have people play nice together, that it is reasonable that a Society of Ether node may disproportionately generate correspondence or entropy tasks that they may want to trade to another group. And it kind of says there is a very good mechanical and narrative reason that you might want to be on good relationships with these people. And again, since cooperation is a sign of evil, it's a case where the technocracy is probably really good at discovering task attunement and then filtering that to the operations or endeavors that are probably best for it. Or alternatively, you could see a scenario where a technocrat group is generating tasks and it is so unaligned to the work they're doing, they just throw it out. And now we have mages that are dumpster diving for quintessence.
Yeah, both of those are things that were considerations. Like once I'd had 2 spheres worth, I had to come up with the rest. And it gives another dimension to make nodes themselves more interesting because after all, in the books, a node is just a dot rating, depending on which book you're looking at, from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Maybe it's a resonance trait. Before Revised, resonance didn't have much in the way of mechanics. In Revised, it had too many mechanics. The problem in M20, to my mind, is that what really should be a fairly simple system got very complicated with resonance and synergy, but they don't really have different rules, but they kind of do. And it's actually a bit confusing. I basically simplified down and use more or less the Fallen Tower Las Vegas rules for resonance.
Okay, which is the idea that you have a certain number of dots in a resonance trait, and if the effect you're doing is in line with it, it gets easier by that many dots. If it opposes it, it gets harder by that many dots in terms of a difficulty adjust, and some effects it just may not manifest.
Exactly. The other aspect of it is that perception plus awareness to detect magic is at difficulty something like is either 8 or 9 minus resonance traits being looked for. And so resonance then also becomes kind of a magical fingerprint once you have a decent amount of it in several traits. So like someone with like 3 dots of fiery resonance and 2 dots of kind resonance is going to be like a very warm, healing person. Basically, it's an excuse for you to reproduce that moment in Star Wars where Darth Vader recognizes Obi-Wan without seeing him.
One of the things I do like about Mage the Awakening as a mechanic is the idea of a nimbus, that you do have these signature manifestations of your magic as you go around, and rather than just being resonance, it is a much more full-bodied, to me, kind of fingerprint on your work. And if I ever do a Things to Steal from Mage the Awakening for Mage the Ascension book or podcast, that is certainly something I'd want to put in there.
I would love to discuss that with you because I seem to be one of the few people who loves both Mage the Ascension and Mage the Awakening for what they are, which is wildly different games with similar mechanics. Uh-huh. And Awakening had much cleaner mechanics out of the gate because, after all, they had a decade and a half of practice writing games before they got to that one.
You also posit a bunch of alternative ways to get quintessence, which I appreciate because it just being nodes very much makes it feel like that oil metaphor. There's this thing we need and there's only one way to get it, and we have to fight over sources of it. And that was a very first edition thing, and only slowly did additional things get brought back. So
I have made no secret. I'm not a big fan of Mage First Edition. Revised was my game, and Second Edition is good. So I tend to posit there are a lot more nodes than First Edition. First Edition suggests that nodes are extraordinarily rare things, and even having a 1-point node is a huge deal. Whereas I tend to think that there are very few nodes of note in a geographic area, but there's probably a bunch of like little 1-point nodes. They're probably coming in and out of existence fairly regularly. And regularly is on the scale of years, not the scale of days. But then, as I said, my favorite explanation for what nodes are is the resonance definition. And if you tie it to things like what humans care about, you should expect it to change a lot and there to be a lot of things that humans care enough about for it to matter, but not so much for it to be powerful.
I'm also a big fan of nodes coming in and out of existence. I like the idea of seasonal nodes, that maybe a college library will manifest a node during finals or during a summer research season.
Oh, I like that.
Or that a particular Christmas festivity location where there's a nativity scene or something and thousands of people come through it.
So Halloween is the standard reference for essentially a seasonal node. A conjunction is the term used in Mage books.
Yeah.
So you mentioned all these alternatives to nodes. I can't take too much credit. Not one of those is actually original to me. All of them are at least referenced in some Mage book.
Oh yeah. Wellsprings were brought in, I think, in M20. Conjunctions have been in it for a while. I guess to me, my notion is the idea that it is still a node, but it is time-bound, as opposed to a conjunction, which to me is time-bound but not place-bound.
At the end of the day, this is a section that's meant to be very practical. It's how does your mage actually get quintessence? Here are the options other than finding a magic spot and making it yours.
And putting a house there, yeah. And again, as Charles says, these are things that all have existed, have been published before. It's just they haven't been brought together in one space. M20 makes kind of references to conjunctions and wellsprings in like other ways, but this is nice to see them all in a single like 2 or 3 page spread to be like, oh wow, there are other options. The next section of the book, you go through the mechanics for rotes and how to actually absorb quintessence and such.
Yeah, the vast majority of that is not quite a reprint from things in Enlightened Grimoire, but most of them are rotes that have appeared in the past. I filled in a few gaps, particularly because Mage has had a weird relationship to ley lines. They were talking about them a lot early on, and then they just disappeared, but then they appeared in other game lines that interacted with nodes in some way.
So what is a ley line then?
In real world mysticism, a ley line is several locations that happen to lie in a line that have something mystically significant in common. The most famous one is St. Michael's line, where there are several churches and whatnot that do seem to just be on a perfect line. Like if you take the one that's farthest east and the one that's farthest west and you draw a line, there's like 3 or 4 different St. Michael's things on that, like actually on the line. In Mage terms, a ley line is a thing that connects nodes to each other and to places and lets you move quintessence along them automatically. So if you say want your chantry to be in downtown Manhattan, but your node is in upstate New York, you would want to first build protections on it properly because you're not going to be physically there all the time. And then you'd build a ley line to basically pipe the quintessence to where you are, basically a magical aqueduct.
If quintessence is oil, this is the pipeline that carries it.
Yeah.
One of the things that's always made me curious is how visible do you posit that nodes and ley lines are? If I am in a city and I get 10 successes on a prime 1 detect quintessence effect, am I going to find 60 nodes? Is that only going to be stuff nearby? How visible to you are these quintessence flows, both on the mundane side of reality and in the penumbra? Prime 1 and appropriate correspondence, let me say.
So this is getting towards a thing that appeared mostly in the first edition New World Order book called Manar.
Yep, magical detecting radar.
And given that we're getting in that direction, that stuff was described as being very effective. So nodes should be defended. You should probably put some effort into hiding them if you have it. Use enough correspondence to ward it properly. 10 successes is 10 successes. You're going to find some stuff. And I figured there's a lot of nodes. There are some ley lines between like some nodes are connected to each other, some aren't. It's semi-random. If you want to hunt down a node, then the best thing to do is to try to find a ley line that you think might go to it and follow it. But of course, that is the most obvious angle of approach. So that's like knocking on the front door to a bunch of heavily armed isolationists.
This has always been one of those things where I personally, in my games, I make the moment a node is being tapped in any way, shape, or form, that it becomes very hard to find, just because conceptually to me, the game becomes wildly different if these things look like blazing infernos in the penumbra or trivially detectable with Prime 1.
Yeah.
I was never a big fan of Maynard. That's just me.
So I will say that I usually treat it as, unless you tell me otherwise, your node is probably hidden in some way. In as much as there are mentions that nodes are obvious in the Umbra, I just ignore that. For me, tap nodes are easier to find because something has been built on them. You could, like, an oil well with a derrick in it is easier to find than an oil well that hasn't been tapped.
Yes, it is harder to find the oil, but it is easier to find signs that there is oil there.
Yes.
Okay.
So most nodes that are in use, if you're really looking hard and you are more skilled than the people who own it, you can probably find it. Now, whether you can take it from them is different, because there's several ways that nodes give a home team advantage in addition to just power. Like, doing magic out of node is one of the modifiers in all of the Mage core books. Often nodes are at the center of reality zones. So imagine trying to lead a strike force where everything you do is vulgar and everything they do is coincidental at -3 difficulty.
Yeah.
They don't need to be more powerful than you to win that one.
Yeah. And it's also one of those cases where we don't get a huge number of examples in the game of nodes changing hands.
Yeah, there's a couple of chantries that change hands, but Mage's meta plot is very light on conquest.
Yeah. And especially for in Horizon Stronghold of Hope, they go through 9 very large nodes, which, again, even if you didn't have access to Maynard, it's probably pretty obvious what they're doing and where that's going.
Yeah, no one is shocked that Stonehenge is a node.
Yeah, the third most powerful on the face of the planet. And I enjoy arguing what the number 1 and number 2 are. You also then posit a system for building nodes. Why do you think this was needed?
So this is my solution to the fact that nodes are just these completely flat objects in the standard books. That, like, there's some hints that you should describe them in some way. There are optional rules to say the node has this resonance or that resonance. I admit I'm a knobs and levers kind of person. Mm-hmm. I like even if I tend to play fast and loose with the rules when I'm actually running the game, when I am figuring out what I intend to have happen and what my setting consists of, I like having all sorts of knobs and levers to figure out what things should look like, how things should work, what I can do to make this thing unique compared to other things in the same setting. And if there's something weird about this thing, what does it do? What does that weirdness mean mechanically? So, like, we discussed sphere-aligned tasks. Well, that would obviously come from sphere-aligned nodes. So, like, among other things, I added merits and flaws for nodes, and one of them aligns the node with a sphere. And in addition to special tasks, the node also ends up with resonance that somehow aligns with that sphere, and there are several examples.
And this is interesting because these are a lot of cases where one person's flaw is another person's merit. So Nefandus is probably interested in your 4-point flaw corrupted node. Or someone may find it annoying that a node is sphere-attuned to something that they're not doing. Or they may find it bothersome that it is also a haunt or a cairn. And I very much like the idea that merits and flaws usually are actually kind of a bundle.
They're context dependent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the reason that I just made corrupted a flaw is because I don't permit PC Nefandi, and the game has mostly been consistent about don't do that. And this book is intended to build the kinds of nodes that PCs might want. Like, if the PCs get their hands on a node and it has been corrupted, that is a flaw in the node. If the PCs never touch the node, the flaw corrupted doesn't matter much except for that the resonance is altered by it.
You indicate infamous node. This one I thought was interesting. Can you give an example of what would make a node infamous, but not necessarily say corrupted or haunted or anything like that?
Did it used to power Duisatep?
Okay.
That could make it infamous.
Got it.
There's the sort of thing where everyone knows about the node and people are not happy about it. Like, the various nodes that powered Horizon are probably all either famous or infamous depending on really the context of the game you're running. If you're running a technocracy game, then Stonehenge is infamous among your people. Part of it is that these things are very context dependent, which means you have to pick the versions that make sense for where you are. And then you mentioned, could be a haunt. I included 3 merits and 3 flaws that are all very closely related, either functioning or former. Haunt, cairn, or freehold, where like dream speakers and werewolves can share a node under the right circumstances. Hollow ones can certainly tap power from a haunt. But, if you're a technocrat, you showed up, you sanitized a freehold, more than even a technocrat normally would. The changelings aren't going to like you. They might try to kill you to take it back.
And that seems like it would certainly make it infamous and give a quick way for that to be an in-game plot hook, so a background that has an obvious cost, as it were. The last section of the book is 20 glorious pages on sample nodes, and you break it down into a few categories. You have ancient sites, you have urban sites, you have wilderness sites. Why break it down that way? And is there one or two that you think were particularly interesting that gives an idea of maybe what your thought process was when coming up with these nodes?
So I broke it down into the three types, partly because I wanted something that was more that divided them up so that it wasn't just just a dump of nodes. But on the other hand, it didn't feel right to say these are tradition nodes, or even these are mystic and these are techno mage, because nodes can change hands in a long-running chronicle. Probably some node will change hands at some point. So I decided that the best way to divide them up was based on like where they are, what is the sort of feel of the realization of the node. And then what I tried to do with the long list of nodes was provide examples of all the mechanics I had introduced for building them. I tried to get most of the merits and flaws in there, a wide variety of resonances and strengths of the nodes. And I tried to give at least one node to each faction. So like there's a Hermetic node in there, there's a New World Order node in there. I even stuck a Wu Kang node in there because they're, to me, the most interesting craft that got left out of M20. Probably the individual node that sparked a lot of the mechanics trying to capture how it actually played it in games is the Manhattan Reactor.
Okay, and what is that?
So it is an Iteration X node. It is one of the nodes that fueled the infamous construct Mecha from Book of Chantries. And it is a nuclear reactor in downtown Manhattan, which is a terrible idea. It has all sorts of merits and flaws attached to it. Like it has the dangerous energies flaw. So it's a forces aligned node. So if the radiation breaches containment, people are going to die. But talk about power.
Yeah, it produces 9 points of quintessence and 9 pawns of TAS. And I like the idea that you said, and if more than 4 pawns of TAS are left in the reactor room, radiation shielding is necessary to safely enter. I really like the idea of having mechanics for what happens if a node goes too long without its TAS being collected. And I like the...
So I run most of my games in New York for many reasons. But if the players somehow manage to dig the technocracy out of probably their oldest construct in the Northeast, or at least their most secure one, being one of the anchor points of Mecca back in Book of Chantries, then they have something on their hands that they might not know how to handle. Among other things, it's a reminder that the technocracy does some terrible things, but they also protect humanity from some terrible things. And just having a free-formed nuclear fission reaction happening in downtown Manhattan, you want someone who really knows what they're doing in charge of that. If that gets out of control, that could be bad. And a bunch of Verbena and Euthanatoi, who take over that node, are very unlikely to know how to properly handle it. Call your local Aetherite.
Yeah. And that is just one of a pretty wide collection of nodes that you provide in here. And again, it's 25 unabashed pages of just node after node after node. And it is great if you are looking for some ideas in that regard. Are there any final thoughts or ideas that you think storytellers should keep in mind when grabbing this, or maybe anything that we didn't mention that you would like to point a finger to?
The thing to keep in mind is that, like I said it once before, but nodes and in Book of Chantries, and other places across the mage line detail chantries, the homes that the mages make for themselves. But they build these things around or powered by nodes. And where a mage gets their power is every bit as important as what they do with it. So just whether you buy the book or not, just try to remember that nodes are important and the details of them matter. It's not just a gas station on the road to ascension.
Charles, thank you so much for your time and for your work and for making it available so cheaply. What is the next thing that you plan to publish, or what are the next 2 things that you plan to put out into the world that our listeners should look forward to?
So I am currently up to my ears in a 20th anniversary update for Sorcerer. I've used Sorcerer many times as an introduction to the world, to the setting of Mage, without the complexity of paradigm and mechanics and freeform magic. And of course, Sorcerers are also, especially if you look at the revised metaplot stuff, the majority of Magic users are Sorcerers. Depending on which revised technocracy book you look at, Extraordinary Citizens may be 22 times the population of awakened people in their convention. It's kind of an important part of the setting as written. Sorcerer has not been touched by the 20th anniversary Mage line, though Vampire 20 and Werewolf 20 have both mentioned Numina a little bit. So that's my next target release. And after that, I've got a few things, but I don't know which one's going to grab me enough to focus in on it yet.
And I look forward to talking to you about that publication if the day comes about where I care at all about sorcerers.
I'll see if I can persuade you.
Okay. I look forward to reading that. Charles, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your work. Our next interview is with writer of the Major Arcana Optional System, Secrets of the Masquerade. The opening question is, what is Secrets of the Masquerade, and where does the name come from?
Oh, Secrets of the Masquerade. It's the name we come up with a friend about my efforts to give some depth to Vampire the Masquerade games. Because back in the mid-2000s, I was noticing that a lot of players and storytellers were very flat. And it deserved a little 3D, and I wanted to write articles to show how to run a campaign, how to run players, how to run characters, how to communicate around the table, and make it interesting and not over the top all about looks. So I opened the blog with that name, and that's how I started writing. It's mostly centered about Vampire, for obvious reasons, but I have extended to other World of Darkness games and Chronicles of Darkness. And I have also used this as a way to criticize and talk about certain less than nice things about the games and the industry in relation to it, including like art choices, layout choices, lack of accessibility, and comparing certain games between each other to show the world and the English-speaking world how other countries do their RPGs.
Is this something you still actively write for? Like, if our audience is curious about these thoughts, is this a webpage or a blog that's still available that people can go read?
Yes, I still write, and my blog is secretsofthemasquerade.tumblr.com.
Well, thank you. You have produced a colossal number of supplements, and as someone who does not play Vampire, I do not find most of them pertinent to me, but you've also done some Wraith publications. You did a character folio and then a supplement, Life Sucks, and then You Die, which I very much enjoyed. And then I saw that you had done a supplement for Mage the Ascension called the Major Arcana. What is Secret of the Masquerade's Major Arcana?
Secrets of the Masquerade's Major Arcana is a small supplement to show how the world of Mage and the world of darkness in general can be non-static. It changes, it shifts, like the paradigm, and that means at certain days or certain sessions to allow players and storytellers to be more creative, certain spheres will be favored by the elements and the world, and certain spheres will be unhinged, they will be bothered. Mechanically speaking, it means that at the table you will bring out the 22 major arcana, and each player, or only the storyteller, however you want, will draw a card, and those will be the spheres that will be helped or not helped by the elements that session.
So the Major Arcana are the named cards within a traditional tarot deck. The Fool, the High Priestess, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Lover's Judgment, the Sun, and so on. And so you will have the stack of 22, and you also provide those cards if a storyteller wants to cut them out if they don't have access to another tarot deck. And so the session starts, I'm the storyteller, and I say each player draw a card, and then maybe I draw one, and maybe I flip one over, and that card is going to affect how magic works during that session or that scene?
That's the idea. Of course, you can adapt depending. Sometimes, if you want, you can draw 2 cards to make it extra hard or extra easy, or only take the positive forces and not the negative. Or if you want to make it extra hard, say, okay, the spheres of this card are all under a negative light. So no spheres are helped, and the spheres of the card are hindered.
Okay.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. I enjoy playing a game called Invisible Sun, which includes something called the Soothe deck, which is a set of 60 cards, and they have 4 fake suits that they use. And that has a similar mechanic, but also is intended to provide inspiration to the person running the game to say, oh, you've revealed the blind guardian. You are going to encounter someone who is protecting something but does not know why. Or you are going to encounter an obstacle that is obviously hindered in a certain way. What was the inspiration for you to do this? Because it's a lovely little system, and it addresses a fundamental problem with Mage in that we're representing reality as being fluid, but there's no rules in the game to make reality more fluid. And your supplement, which clocks in at $2.50, for $2.50 adds that. So what was your inspiration to create this?
I knew of Invisible Sun because I follow RPG news. However, I didn't make the connection that it was a similar mechanic. I was actually inspired by a French game called Les Lames du Cardinal, which is an interesting game where you play the weapons of the Cardinal, or actually the musketeers of Cardinal Mazarin. It's semi-historical. It's kind of like 7C, but fun.
Okay.
And I mean, 7C is very fun, but L'Âme du Cardinal is a bit more. It uses more cards and it uses more props. And 7C, which I also have. As you said, I believe that the paradigm of Mage does not have this element that is, how to say this? The game system does not correspond to what is said. The mechanics are not telling me the game and the world is fluid and changing, and there's no paradigm shift situation in the game system. And I always like to try and make players and storytellers have a hint of imagination. Say, okay, I cannot use this sphere for this session, so I have to think of a new way of doing the thing. Limitations tend to open the mind of a lot of people, and the whole writer's block situation. If you have a blank page, because Mage is a blank page, you can do everything. But if you tell people you can do everything except using this, it gives more of a oomph to do something interesting.
So if a storyteller wanted to introduce this, what would they have to do? Simply buy the supplement and print out the cards? Or do they need something else to get started with this?
I would guess you would need a core book of the game.
Okay, yeah.
But other than that, you don't need anything more. Just, use the cards. If the spheres are green, they are favored. If the spheres are red, they are not favored. And just use a table that's in the supplement. You don't need to know about tarot itself. I just went with whatever was balanced enough. So there's a big chart with all of the cards and all of the spheres that are hindered and helped. And I went with the general meaning of the cards. But if you don't know tarot, that's fine. If you use a regular card game of tarot, the one with the Major Arcana, which are named from 1 to 21, and the 0 is the Fool, you can use that too if you want. In France, it's very common for households to have a poker card and a tarot deck for games, because it's a common card game that we play, that it's not for divinatory purposes.
Oh, interesting. Your supplement also includes what appears to be a number of French, or at least French-named cards. What deck is that from? It is graphics that I have not seen before. I'm used to the standard Mage and the standard Rider-Waite deck, which is common in the United States. I haven't seen these before. Do you know where they came from?
It's a Tarot Marseille. It's the first common version of the tarot, I believe. The pictures I use are the historical and read public domain version. They're usually the ones you can find if you are into historical reasons of why the tarot was made and how it was made. It's one of the first tarot artwork, and they're written in French because this is why the death number 13 does not have a name, because it's a card without name.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
I was curious reading through the rules that's listed, and I'm like, the card with no name. What's that? And now I see that it is very obviously death.
and notice how I put the rubbers behind it.
Oh, okay.
It was not. I had to edit some of them.
Oh, interesting.
The wall, the last one, I had the
okay.
symbol at the back.
You added mind to it? That looks like the symbol for mind.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. So yeah, but it's because the game was French.
Okay. Are you working on any other Mage the Ascension supplements? Or if not, are there any books that you have written as part of Secrets of the Masquerade that you think might help someone who's playing Mage?
I believe the Primogen Court Coterie chart can be useful for Mage players because it's actually just a relationship chart of 7 characters, and you just remove the clans, you don't care. Other than that, what I'm planning to do for Mage, I really want to go further into it. And I actually wrote a small non-World of Darkness supplement in a collaborative effort. In the Short Game Digest, I wrote a small spell casting game, which is just about casting spells. Even if I wrote more about Vampire, I still believe like the Guide to Grouping, which was my April Fool's special, is very relevant to Mage players, and it's a pay-what-you-want game. So if you want to grab it, you can.
And a lot of these supplements are either pay what you want or very inexpensive. And Secrets of the Masquerade produces a number of bundles where you can get several publications at a discount. And also, I believe when Onyx Path runs a sale on Old World of Darkness, your supplements are also discounted then too, correct?
Yes, and when there's drive-through sales about World of Darkness games, usually the Vault authors also have sales going on. In my case, I also play some RG games. Sometimes if you follow me on Twitter or Facebook, I will hide certain links somewhere. I will put some AC code somewhere, and you can find free community copies of any of my book if you follow up. Like I put in the Guide to Dying, Guide to Siring, and Guide to Hunting as a bundle. They were free for a number of hours, days. For the Trick or Treat, I put a Trick or Treat book for Halloween, and people, it was pay what you want. People would say, "Oh yeah, great, it's a trick," and actually, they some of them found the treat inside of the book. I was very, very happy. So yeah, I want to work further on Mage if I can. However, the system is very heavy for me.
Yes. You've produced, or your group has produced 27 supplements so far, which there's a lot of authors on the Storyteller Vault who've produced 1 or 2. What got you writing supplements in the first place? Or what made your group say, hey, not only do we want to give advice to people, but we want to make these available as books?
Well, I'm alone, so I wish I could... no, except for the collaboration I did with Marina Papetti, which is the artist behind the Guide to Coteries. I work alone. Let's be honest, I did it out of spite.
Okay, so some people work out of love and other people work out of spite. And in both cases, we can get wonderful things.
Spite works a lot better for me because I want to show the world that, okay, we can do things that are meaningful. The design of the game can have a message, an impact message. I was pissed off at Mage because yes, you talk about the paradigm shift and how the reality changes, and the game system is so heavy and so complicated, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
what you're saying is not in the game. So I wanted to do a little something about it because it's very heavy. And for Hunter, the one little supplement to Hunter, I was like, what makes people want to embrace vampires? Okay, that's easy. How people die and how does that affect people being raised? Okay, that I can know. I was like, how do people encounter the supernatural and decide to become hunters? And I'm considering a guide to ascensing, but in that same vein, like what motives and what brings someone to awaken for Mage, but it's going to be more tricky because there's the choice of the avatar, the initiation, so it's a bit more complicated than just finding the supernatural and deciding to kill it.
Okay.
Or dying and just staying around.
So, are there any other publications you're working on that we should look forward to seeing in the next few months?
Right now, I'm not writing a new book right now. However, I am reworking my By Night, and I will give it a new layout. And I'm going to make it a World of Darkness Bordeaux. So I will introduce the mages of Bordeaux, the race of Bordeaux, a couple of championings of Bordeaux, the occasional hunter. So yeah, because the Bordeaux by Night supplements right now only present the vampire aspect, even if they do mention the mage that is involved in the situation, because there's a mage that has some connections with the vampires of the setting, and the players can encounter this mage. It involves pizza with pineapple, and and the players who I'm running this setting right now, and my players have encountered this mage, but they don't know it's a mage.
Okay.
They just crossed paths, and the guy was with some pizza and pineapple on pizza, and one of the players judged, okay, this is a person of good taste. This is how you judge a friend. Hopefully you will look forward to the World of Darkness version of Bordeaux, which will include the mages. And
so you are very active in the Storyteller Vault community. You participate in Facebook, you're on the Discord. What kind of supplements do you wish existed? Like, what kind of books for the Vault do you wish were being written?
I want to see more supplements about settings and location which are written by locals. I'm sorry, but I'm tired of American supplements written by Americans, and what about the rest of the world? I mean, I have friends in Libya, I have friends in Syria, I have friends in Cairo, I have friends in Istanbul, I have German friends, I have Spanish friends, and we're like, what about us? And when we try to do something local, either nobody cares, or if we do it in our own language, so the rest of the world doesn't care. For instance, right now, and I got this yesterday, so I might as well, I got my France by Night supplement for Vampire the Dark Ages, which was published with Dark Ages 20th anniversary edition. And the book is just amazing, and it's in French, so I can't show it to you guys. Well, I could, but you wouldn't. You don't care. You wouldn't care.
It is very pretty, even though I cannot read French. It is very pleasing to look at.
Yeah, we really want more locally produced stuff, and for that we need more support, because art costs money, and even if I have great friends that allow me to use their art and license me their art, or for a portion of the profit, I want more locations which are more international, because it's the world of darkness, not the US of darkness. More teach me about your culture through the game. So okay. Bordeaux has a lot of stuff about wine, so I wrote a lot about wine. And someone complained that there's too much stuff about wine. I was like, yeah, but it's important.
It's Bordeaux, yeah. Okay, so you'd like to see more local supplements explaining people's culture through the lens of the game and through the setting itself. So listeners, if you are living in an interesting portion of the world, including the United States, just because we're pretty good on Chicago, but especially as regards Mage, we literally only have one location supplement about Las Vegas. Get out there and write about your area. It's pretty straightforward to do. Get out there, write a supplement about your location. There are a lot of people on the Storyteller Vault Facebook group or the various Storyteller Vault Discords who are willing to help you through this process. Even if it's not the prettiest thing, if it contains characters, settings, plots, and information about the area, you will have an audience, and Mage the Podcast will help you have it. So thank you so much for your time with us. Is there anything you'd like to say in parting, or any other comments or ideas that you didn't get a chance to share with our audience?
Well, my philosophy in making the game, the book that I make, is really to have meaningful and inclusive mechanics.
Okay.
And I really wish, right now, I've not been able to, but this is also why I'm redoing the layout for Bordeaux by Night, is that I want my books to be readable for people who may have sight disabilities, so to be accessible. And accessibility also means teaching about certain gaming practices. Usually Mage works well with this, because Mage is all about empowering individuals and finding them where they are. I just wish that it was more so, that it really took the step further. And I mean, right now with the Book of Fallen, who has just came out, I really doubt about what's going on officially, and I wish the Vault authors would step it up and produce more for Mage, because there's not a lot of Mage books, right, on the Vault, as far as I know.
Since Mage 20, we have gotten a little bit less than one book a year.
Oh yeah, I was saying there's not a lot of Mage supplements on the Vault.
Oh, okay, yeah. We have a few, and hopefully this episode will help get people more aware of that. Charles Siegel, perennial guest of the show, has done 4 supplements, I believe. At this, I'm working on my 3rd supplement, but it is certainly less represented than Vampire.
I mean, I believe that for Mage we would need more philosophical supplements. I mean, the occasional supplement about how to understand certain visions of the world, because it's all about the paradigm and the reality. And nobody amongst our player base, and I mean, I may have a master's degree in certain things, and technically I do have one in political sociology.
Okay.
But not everyone has had 5 years of philosophy and psychology classes to really bring that to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully those who have would be able to make a quick crash course about those things in the Vault, because some things are just not accessible.
More supplements that explain maybe a paradigm or a worldview for people who may not have the cultural or philosophical background in that, but may still want to play it. Like a guide to playing pagans, or a guide to playing technostics, or a guide to ritual magic users, and the worldview that comes with that.
Yeah, and for instance, I mean, there's something that comes up often as a discussion topic amongst IT people. It's like a Rocco's Basilisk. Sorry if you didn't know, you are now into the conspiracy. Yeah, Rocco's Basilisk. It deserves a true explanation written by someone who has a great background in IT, and not just some guy who found a video on YouTube talking about it and just butchering it for Mage. And it deserves better.
So for the audience, Rocco's Basilisk is an idea that is offhandedly presented in Book of the Fallen, but slightly modified in a way that has annoyed some people. But the idea is that if you are a strict utilitarian of some sort, and your goal is to get the greatest good for the greatest number, the best thing you could do is work towards instantiating this entity that would allow perfect joy for the entirety of humanity. And that as a logical extension of that, it would make sense for that entity to punish people who impeded its creation or delayed its instantiation. So you now have this essentially omnipotent artificial general intelligence which creates simulations of people that impeded its ability to exist. And since if you are a strict materialist, the representation of all the connections and activities in the brain is the same as the brain, which is the same as the mind. You essentially have this omnipotent entity that creates virtual hells to punish people for eternity that didn't help bring it into creation, because bringing that entity into existence sooner would have maximized the net utility and flourishing of humanity. Did I do an okay job summarizing that?
Yeah, it's future blackmail, actually. The entity itself is not evil. The entity itself wants to arrive the soonest it can to solve all of the problems of humanity. And to come soonest, they will punish those who knew she was coming, or it was coming, yeah. Yeah, sorry, we don't have it gender in French. We don't do that. But by default, we gender everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they would punish everyone who knew it was going to come. The idea is that the intelligence will create a copy of you to torture you, but it threatens you to do it to make you invest in its creation. It's a blackmail. It's a future blackmail by a creator that does not exist yet.
Yeah. It hinges on the simulation hypothesis that a perfect simulation of you would be the same as you. So it does require a certain commitment to philosophical naturalism in a way that some people feel uncomfortable in the same way that if you were to have a perfect clone of you, would that be, how would that affect the notion of identity? It is a fascinating thought experiment, if nothing else, and points out how some philosophical positions lead to seemingly odd places. But at the same time, it is a group that is perfectly set up for a bunch of mages to try and pursue creating that entity.
Entity does not punish those who didn't know. So sorry, this is why I apologize, because now
Yeah.
you're into the conspiracy.
Yep.
The entity does not punish those who didn't know and as such are innocent. So if you know and you decide to not do anything, you're as guilty. So it blackmails you from the future, which is the whole mind-blowing situation, which is why everyone on Less Wrong, I believe, everyone lost their mind. I mean, the situation, I mean, it's singularism.
Singularity. Yeah. Post-singularitarianism.
I mean, it's a whole kind of worms with people who are very into something. Yeah, the hypothetical agent in question. I mean, it's a very very specific type of people, and as such, for mage, this could mean that some mages who would actually actively work towards informing people of this future blackmail, so they invest, or work hard on having it come, but making sure that nobody knows about it, so it cannot punish anyone. Because the 4 people who are working on making it happen won't get punished because they actually work full time on it, and they don't want others to know about its potential existence.
Mm-hmm.
So this way, the artificial intelligence will say, "Okay, you didn't inform anyone about this. I could have come sooner, but I cannot punish those who didn't know."
Which creates an interesting circumstance. I'd be curious to see a group of some sort of church that similarly believed that anyone who didn't believe in their God was damned, but that only applied to people who knew about their God in the first place. So I like an idea of a group of proselytizing celestial chorus members who do so very selectively and very slowly, because they know anyone that they preach to who disagrees with them is going to, in their eyes, receive damnation. So it's
that existed. That is a thing. Yeah, Catholics did that when they colonized the Americas. Those Indians who survived, Native Americans and South Native Americans, so all of the population, the priest told them, "Okay, yeah, now you know you're baptized and you're going to be saved if you do this." And some Indians say, "But if you hadn't told us, would we have gone to heaven?" And the answer is yes. So the Indians would answer, "Well, why did you tell
us?" Yeah.
There was it happened. It's a thing that happens. But yeah, it's a strange situation that would be worth exploring in a mage game. And yeah, it actually did happen. The whole proselytism that actually, if they were left ignorant, it was better for their souls, but they didn't give a shit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, fun stuff.
So more location supplements and more dense philosophy supplements involving people's paradigms. Got it.
And accessible to people who don't have those, that level of education.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to discuss, or do you think this is a good summary of your work and where you'd like to see the community go?
Well, I think that's fair. It's a fair take of what I do and what I'm trying to do, and hopefully what I push the whole industry to try and be more mindful of.
Excellent. The links to all of Secrets of the Masquerade's publications, as well as to the blog and other material, are going to be available in our show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Take care.
You've been listening to Mage the Podcast. If you haven't already subscribed, you can subscribe to Mage the Podcast on Spotify, Anchor, TuneIn, iTunes, Google Play Podcasts, or the podcatcher of your choice. If you do, you'll get a toasty new episode each and every week. Our audience grows through personal recommendations, so if you know someone who'd like it, pass it on or leave a review on iTunes. We have a Hop in Discord community at discord.me/magethepodcast, and you can also give us your thoughts and feedback over email at magethepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter @magethepodcast. Also go to magethepodcast.com for show notes and links referenced in this episode. Thanks. Bye.